The views expressed on this program are not necessarily those of WTJX, its board, staff, or underwriters.
On this episode of Comes with the Territory, representatives from Virgin Islands Waste Management Authority are here to discuss how they address recent sewage overflow issues in downtown Christiansted and explain how they're managing sewage challenges across the territory. Plus,
there are legislation from since the beginning of time that needs to be changed.
we'll explore a legislative effort to modernize sections of the Virgin Islands Code that haven't been updated since 1959. Legislation has advanced to establish an annual Beer, Wine, and Spirits Festival on St. Croix, though some lawmakers voice concerns over festival saturation and diminishing returns. We'll have the details.
Just trying to get to break even.
The Virgin Islands Waste Management Authority is working to reduce cost and break even, but its latest cost-cutting measure has raised concerns in the Senate. We'll explain, and later. This week's panel joins the conversation to analyze these issues and more. Comes with the Territory starts now. Welcome to Comes with the Territory. I'm Marcelina Ventura Douglas. Downtown Christiansted was overwhelmed by the smell of raw sewage when 3 manholes flooded the streets and harbor 2 weeks ago. Business owners, residents, and tourists had to endure the stench, with one of the worst spots being near the government parking lot by Angry Nate's restaurant. According to waste management officials, the problem was caused by a failure of a pump at the LBJ station, which was fixed 3 days after the issue was reported. Similar problems have occurred on St. Thomas and St. John. Waste management officials reported that a manhole behind the Windward Passage Hotel overflowed recently due to equipment failure, and a manhole near the Cruise Bay wastewater treatment facility on St. John has repeatedly spilled over in the past, mostly due to high tides. Waste management officials have stated that as of now, all of these issues have been temporarily fixed, but the aging infrastructure remains a concern. Many residents are now wondering when a permanent solution will be put in place to prevent future problems. I'm joined now by Keith Smith, Territorial Wastewater Manager for the Virgin Islands Waste Management Authority. Welcome to Comes with the Territory, Mr. Smith.
Thank you for having me.
Also joining us from our St. Croix studio are St. Croix Wastewater Manager Darnley Peterson and Senior Engineer Project Manager Ronald Phillips. Welcome to the show, gentlemen.
Good day.
Welcome.
Mr. Peterson, can you explain some of the challenges the aging sewer system on St. Croix and what's being done right now to prevent future overflows?
Well, when it comes to Virgin Islands, St. Croix specifically, we have a system that we're dealing with that's approximately 60 years old. Some of the sewer lines are composed of cast iron or clay pipes, which was preference back then. Also, 60 years prior, we kind of lacked the foresight. When I say we, just as a people, we lacked the foresight to not have certain tie-ins into our sewer system. Things like stormwater runoff really affect the operation of this antiquated system, oftentimes overloading the system during heavy rains and events that as such. Now, when we have the pumping system, when you talk about the pumping system, you're talking about a pumping system where the pumps have already surpassed their life expectancy. Okay, so compiled with that, the system is very fickle. It's sensitive. And we as a people, we just have to be vigilant, from waste management, doing our preventative maintenance, which consists of the constant flushing of these lines, to community members, knowing what they put down the drain, business owners, we have to be wary of the grease. Household residents, we have to be wary of things like flushable wipes that be marketed as flushable, but in actuality, it's not. It's no good for the system. All these things cause pluggage and cause an interruption of flow, which in turn causes the overflows that we see at the manholes.
And Mr. Phillips, I know that you guys have been working on some solutions until the infrastructure can be changed. How long is these solutions expected to last?
Right now, everyone knows that FEMA has approved prudent replacement for St. Croix, which is to replace the entire sewer system. But one thing we have to understand that this is not an overnight fix. Prudent replacement might take us about anywhere from 10 to 15 years, but more likely it's going to be 15 years. Right now, we're in the process of looking at what we call the LBJ sewer shed, which is all of the sewer lines of all the residential homes that are within the LBJ area. And that's where the pump station is located. So there's an engineering firm by the name of EDT, and EDT is in the process of actually looking at the system and coming up with an overall plan. One of the plan is the LBJ pump station is going to be relocated. And secondly, with the LBJ pump station, one of the things that I'm going to allude to Mr. Peterson, that when that pump station goes down and you have those manhole overflowing, is because number one, you lose your pump, which is electrical driven pump. And this pump is a 250 horsepower pump that has a capacity to pump 3,000 gallons of water. So what happens is that when that pump goes out of service, all the water starts to fill up in what we call the wet well. Once the wet well is full, all the lines starts to fill up, and then eventually the water has to go somewhere because the residents are still using the water. And so when you see the manholes that are actually, I refer to as bubbling, overflowing in the LBJ, at the Angry Nate intersection, because that is one of the lowest spots within the system, and that's the way for the water to go. In the days when Public Works operated the system, they had a line, a direct line that they could actually pump the wastewater over the reef in Christiansted. So what that does, it protects the town of Christiansted. And to a certain extent, that is what you call an emergency bypass. But unfortunately, Congress passed the Clean Water Act, and what the Clean Water Act says that if you collect wastewater, you have to collect it, transport it, and treat it before you can dispose it. Mm-hmm. But prudent replacement is going to be our solution, but it's not going to be overnight.
I want to go over to the St. Thomas St. John district. Yes. We're also seeing some of these issues happening over here on the St. Thomas St. John district as well too. Behind the Windward Passage Hotel, we have sewage overflowing in St. John in the Cruz Bay area. Explain to me what's causing some of these issues.
Like Mr. Phillips was saying, and Peterson, we have a unintentional combined system in the Virgin Islands, the entire territory. And when I say combined means stormwater and sewer. But so we have that, because, but the infrastructure, the sewer infrastructure was not designed for combined, right? So we having of course infiltration of stormwater into our systems, and that is not only water we get. Whatever you see after a storm, in the gutters, the trash and the garbage, the 2x4s, a lot of stuff, that stuff also gets into our system. And because it gets into our system, it gets into our pumps. That wasn't designed for that kind of stuff. So when you see the guys pull the pumps out, if you're ever on site, you'll notice they pull the 2x4s, they pull the garbage, trash, all kind of stuff out of the pumps, right? And that's really affecting our system, right? Some systems, right, in certain parts of the world, in the States, they're designed for combined, but in the Virgin Islands, it's not. Now, in the Charlotte Amalie area, we have a number of pump stations. But the most critical is the Cancrine pump station.
Speak to me about the Cancrine pump station. I know we've been having some issues there. Speak to me about what's, the specific challenges you're having at Cancrine.
So all the other pump stations in the Charlotte Amalie area pump to the Cancrine pump station. The Cancrine pump station is the only way to get sewage out of Charlotte Amalie. So if that fails, everything backs up, right? So what happened at Cancrine is that it's a triplex system where we have 3 pumps in Cancrine, right? And when I started working, I just came on to waste management, but when I started working in August 2023, I noticed that only one of the pumps was online, right? And reason being, of course, the aged. And that particular pump, I start looking to see, where can we get another pump online, you know? And the thing is, they don't make the pump anymore. And then the parts for the pump came out of the Ukraine, right? And I can't get the parts for the pumps anymore, right? So what we did, we got an emergency pump, which actually that's what saved us outside. Because after the storm, you know, you have a little delay because the stuff have to work itself downstream and work itself. So after the storm, we have a few days delay. And then not only Conquine, but on St. Croix, LBJ, Fig Tree Pump Station, those are the major pump stations, right? I have sit in my office and I get a call, Conquine is down. And then a few hours later, you ready for some more news, Mr. Smith? Fig Tree is offline. You ready for some more news, Mr. Smith? LBJ is offline. Literally in the same day, right? And that's because all that stuff finally worked itself downstream.
Yeah.
Damage our impellers in our pumps, right? We have to pull our pumps and try to repair them, right?
So
we
let
have to get it
me,
closed.
I know that you guys are constantly working to try and repair them and, you know, until the prudent replacement is ultimately done, you know, how sustainable is some of these temporary fixes?
Well, we have a plan. We have a plan to replace all the pumps in Conquine, right? And we're also working towards replacing all the pumps in Fig Tree and LBJ, which are our major pump stations, right? And try to do some protective measures for our pump stations, like better screening, because all the pump stations do have screening,
Okay.
right? But getting better screening, automatic screening, stuff like that, right?
And this is also for St. John.
Well, St. John don't have that problem in particular. When I say that problem with the major pumps in St. John, right? The problem in St. John, of course, we still have the combined issue in St. John, but it's better managed in St. John because it's such a small system,
Okay.
right? A smaller pipe and stuff like that. But in St. John, the issue in St. John is we have the wastewater treatment plant. In the initial design was designed for the discharge, which is the effluent, which is the treated water, was designed to gravity feed out of the plant and about 2 miles offshore, but by gravity, right? However, because that pump station was built on, of course, reclaimed land, the discharge line is pretty much settling right now. So the plan for St. John is to actually change that line into a force main, what we use pumps instead of gravity, use pumps so we could combat the tide. So you find when the tide is high, real high, we are fighting to get the effluent, which is the treated stuff, out of the plant, 2 miles offshore into the sea.
Okay.
Right.
I want to go back over to St. Croix, to you gentlemen here in St. Croix. You know, we have some long-term strategies that's happening given the ongoing challenges with sewer overflows. You know, Mr. Phillips, you spoke briefly just about the $989 million that FEMA funding that came through for the Prudent Replacement Project to upgrade those wastewater infrastructure. But in the meantime, you know, what can the community expect in the coming months?
Well, like what Mr. Smith said, the one thing that we can do is actually get new pumps. Right now, LBJ and Fig Tree Pump Station, they have 3 pumps. So what you refer to, those are, you could say you have a triple redundancy system, but also you have a diesel backup pump. So therefore, if you lose WAPA power, which is utility power, they also have a backup generator to provide electrical power to the electrically driven pumps. And then if that fails, then you also have your diesel pump. But you still have to be able to have pumps that are in working condition, and those pumps are really beyond their service life. So like what Mr. Smith is saying, that what we really have to do now is get new pumps. That's the only solution that we have right now where the resident could get some relief.
Okay. And Mr. Peterson, you know, I know you spoke briefly just about what the community can do to kind of help alleviate those problems. You know, speak to me, I guess, a little bit more in detail on, you know, what residents are doing and how they can help prevent future sewage issues.
Okay, before I speak about that, I'm going to speak about what waste management is doing as far as educating the public. We have our communications team going out and doing public outreach. We've started a FAG initiative, that's fat, oils, and grease. And those are some things that really hamper our ability to operate when it comes to the lines, our sewer lines. So getting out there and really educating the public, educating the kids, because the kids gonna come home with that information and they're gonna tell mommy and dad, hey, you can't dump that grease down the drain, and that's what we want. We want to get out there. We want to have our enforcement officers trained on sorting fat, oil, and grease process. Go out there with the restaurant owners and not necessarily find them, but work together to try to alleviate this situation. One thing that restaurant owners are responsible for, that's the cleaning and the maintenance of their own grease traps. Okay, not because you have a grease trap in your process mean that they don't have to be maintained. One of the things that we will be looking for is their manifest, basically a log of the contractor that they have hired to come to perform this service for them. Okay, so with that, with us really getting out there and educating the public and telling them the hazards and the dangers associated with this kind of disposal, hopefully we could see a change in the behavior that's happening.
All right, thank you so much for that. Mrs. Smith, I want to come back over to the St. Thomas area. I know predominantly, we're having issues with the Cancrine station. We've been seeing that overflow behind the Windward Passage area. Are there other areas, here on St. Thomas specifically that, you guys have been working on or that you've been seeing some of these issues as well too?
Oh, yes. Of course, we have an age system, like Phyllis said earlier. In the recent times, right, since I'm new here, I've been looking at all the trouble calls that we receive, right, and how it affects us. The we call root cause analysis. And majority of failures, 98% of our failures is because of either cast iron pipe, we still have concrete pipe failures, and the clay pipe failure. Just recently, in a matter of 3 weeks, I did cast iron pipe in Anna Street. Right? Failure. We did also just behind the courthouse at Nalagara.
Yeah.
We just finished on Saturday. That was 140 feet of clay pipe that just collapsed and just fell under the ground. So
essentially, until we can get these pipes changed, until we can get these pumps changed, this is going to be a continuous fight.
Yes.
Okay. Well, gentlemen, I want to thank you so much for your time. I really and truly do appreciate all of this education that you've been giving us today. And coming up, we're going to hear from this week's panel. But first, let's look at the issues up for discussion.
The rule of thumb is that codes of laws throughout the country generally updated every 10 years. And so you can do the math that we have not updated our code since 1959 at the latest.
The 35th legislature sought to address this issue through symposiums aimed at speeding up the legislative process by allowing government agencies to suggest updates to the Virgin Islands Code for more efficient operations. The goal was to begin modernizing outdated laws.
Together, we can influence legislative and regulatory measures that enhance efficiency and productivity across the 3 branches of government.
At the inaugural legislative symposium in August on St. Croix, government agencies like the Department of Licensing and Consumer Affairs presented proposed amendments.
We are proposing amendments to allow the DLCA to adjust licensing fees annually and impose stricter administrative fines for violations, including the authority to issue both civil and criminal citations for the same offense.
During the second leg of the symposium in St. Thomas, agencies like the Department of Personnel and the Bureau of Motor Vehicles presented a large number of proposed amendments, but lawmakers urged more scrutiny and called for a more thorough legislative process.
Doing it in this manner is just convoluted, and this is how we make mistakes.
Perhaps we need to have smaller subcommittees to tackle the Virgin Islands Code, maybe title after title, one title at a time, so that we can address, maybe in a sit-down round table, a discussion, we can have a clear and coherent strategy for addressing some of these issues.
The symposiums ultimately culminated in Bill number 35-0388, which revises antiquated sections of Title V of the Virgin Islands Code to align with current law and practice.
This is just the revision of the code, Title V, because you have legislation on our books that would say if you're married to an idiot, you can get a divorce. That if a certain animal, a pig, runs down Main Street, that's not the only animal that's permitted coming down the Main Street. And that was because back then I understand that there was a slaughterhouse, and that's where animals were able to come down the street. So there are legislation from since the beginning of time that needs to be changed. Simple words that need to be changed. Nothing that is complicated, nothing that is controversial. So Bill number 35-0388, I ask for your support.
The Senate Committee on Rules and Judiciary voted to advance the bill on October 10th, with all present committee members voting in favor of the measure. Bill number 35-0388 was passed by the Senate on October 16th.
When I started here 2 years ago, we were $15 million over budget, and now we're down to $2 million over budget, but we have to get to break even. So it's really environment and lowering cost.
As part of its efforts to lower costs, the Waste Management Authority plans to halt all trash collection responsibilities in housing communities, a change already implemented at public schools. Interim CEO Darrell Griffith confirmed this during a recent hearing before the Senate Committee on Budget, Appropriations, and Finance. The issue came up when Senator Marvin Blyden referenced a July letter from former Waste Management Director Roger Merritt, which informed the Virgin Islands Housing Authority that waste management would no longer be responsible for trash collection in housing communities. Blyden asked whether the Housing Authority had contracted with private haulers to manage trash collection as a result.
Well, they haven't started collecting yet. Lydia Pell called me and said that the Senate was going to try and block us from stopping that. So hopefully you don't, and because that will save us on both islands about $600,000 for garbage collection. That's why we approached the Housing Authority. We went to the Department of Education, and the Department of Education has taken over their garbage collection at the schools and doing it with the same private haulers that we were paying, because we were not doing this in-house. We were basically just contracting it out with private vendors.
Senator Donna Fred Gregory expressed concerns, questioning why the Department of Education should bear the cost when waste management already receives government funding.
We are giving you $35 million, and you are charging the Department of Education to pick up trash? Something wrong with that picture? Something is wrong with that picture. The Department of Education should not be paying to pick up trash.
Fred Gregory continued to press the issue, highlighting waste management's financial challenge and the added strain on the Department of Education.
We pay your bills. Every time you guys don't pay, you had a court case, a settlement with some harassment thing. The government paid upwards of $250,000, but education must pay for their garbage? No, that's an issue.
A revenue generator aimed at boosting the tourism department's efforts to rejuvenate St. Croix. These were the words of Senator Diane Capehart as she introduced Bill number 35-0257, which seeks to establish an annual U.S. Virgin Islands Beer, Wine, and Spirits Festival.
That both chambers on both districts, vendors and businesses of all sizes are not just behind this bill, they are championing it. Their overwhelming support underscores the potential impact and importance of this initiative.
Despite this support, Capehart's legislation was met with some hesitation when it was recently introduced before the Senate Committee on Economic Development and Agriculture. Citing the global trend of festival cancellations due to low attendance, Division of Festivals Director Ian Turnbull emphasized the need for careful evaluation before moving forward.
It is important to carefully assess whether the festival can be sustained annually without placing undue financial pressure on the local government's budgets. Perhaps we should look at tweaking existing legislation passed for an annual music event and incorporate the promotion of spirits.
Turnbull's comments referenced the USVI Music Festival bill, which was signed into law earlier this year. The sponsor of that bill, Senator Donna Fred Gregory, expressed concerns about adding another new festival into the mix.
I am concerned. I am all for us having festivals and all of this good stuff. But I wish to remind us that in January of 2024, we passed the Music Festival bill. And there was a lot of discussion around it. When I look at the two measures, they seem to mirror each other.
Fred Gregory ultimately voted against Bill number 35-0257, as did Senator Alma Francis Halliger, who voiced similar concerns.
I think this piece of legislation is repetitious and it would defeat the purpose. At the end of the day, the one that was already passed in January could be utilized to do the exact same thing.
Despite the opposition, the bill advanced from the Senate Committee on Economic Development and Agriculture on October 9th, with 5 votes in favor and 2 against. Bill number 35-0257 was passed by the Senate on October 16th. Joining me on set to analyze these issues is Raven Phillips, co-host of the online talk show, The Fish Fry. Welcome to Comes with the Territory, Ms. Phillips.
Thank you so much for having me.
And from our St. Croix studio, let's welcome attorney Key Walker, founder and managing attorney of the Walker Legal Group, and local teacher Anthony Martinborough Jr. It's great to have you both here.
Thank you for having me.
Great to be here.
Before we explore the issues of the day, I'd like to get your thoughts on the featured discussion. Mr. Martinborough, you were actually in downtown Christiansted with your students earlier this month when raw sewage was flowing, and you were quoted in our WTJX newsfeed report, stating that it was harming business on the boardwalk and tourism. Tell me, what are your thoughts on what waste management representatives just said about a fix to this ongoing issue?
Thank you again for having me here. To be honest, the smell has been an issue, not just only now, but it's been for years. And I think the public is just tired of, the issues and the concerns that's happening around the smell. But the main thing that, which was referenced in the article, was that businesses are around this area, especially restaurants. And when you're talking about trying to make revenue and trying to make money, you kind of don't want to be eaten where you're smelling rotten eggs or whatever. So I heard some suggestions and some solutions that they brought up. I just think that it needs to happen a little faster so that the public can begin to get some better results, and that we can be able to go to town in Christiansted and not have to smell rotten eggs, especially on the boardwalk.
Ms. Phillips, what are your thoughts on some of the discussion from Waste Management on their temporary solutions that they're proposing?
So I have a lot of concerns, I think, when it comes to what was discussed. I can appreciate the fact that they have some temporary solutions on the way, because this is a matter, not just a matter of waste management, this is a public health issue as well, having people exposed to that sewage in the street. It's a safety hazard. So I'm happy to hear that they have some idea of how to address it in a temporary manner, but it's really concerning to hear that ultimately what has to happen is a full replacement of the system, and the fact that that's going to take 10 to 15 years, and that's because it's an old, outdated system. We're constantly hearing of our aging and failing infrastructure, and it's really, really concerning.
Yeah. Attorney Walker, do businesses in the area have legal options or recourse when raw sewage can potentially impact their ability to operate and drive away customers?
Definitely. This is not the first time this has happened in downtown Christiansted. And I have represented at least one business owner in the past that settled, its claim with the Waste Management Authority. The issue here, though, is it's now a huge problem that's occurring throughout Christiansted, and it's affecting businesses and homeowners. There are homeowners that are located in Christiansted in the Watergut area who are also suffering from the smell, you know, children getting sick, homes needing repairs and renovations because it has seeped through the walls of their homes. So ultimately, this is an issue for the entire territory because how many lawsuits can waste management really deal with? Ultimately, I think there needs to be just a territorial plan to revamp our waste management system because it's larger than just the need to replace these outdated sewage lines.
Yeah. I want to shift now to a different issue. An omnibus bill recently passed in the Senate, and that amends various sections of the Virgin Islands Code to remove outdated language and improve clarity. Attorney Walker, we're going to stay with you to get your legal thoughts on this. While the bill focuses mainly on non-controversial updates, such as changing court names, what are more significant changes to the code do you think should be next on the legislature's agenda?
Oh, I mean, there's so many, right? So this was actually just like the a chip away at an iceberg of updating the VI code. We actually have a position called the code reviser. So there's supposed to be an ongoing effort. There's an employee, possibly a staff, that's actually tasked with proposing changes to the VI code. There are so many important sections of the VI code that need to be updated. I think the ones that we probably should focus on right now are related to families, and updating those. But you know, this is an effort that will be ongoing for years because there's just so much work to do with the code.
And Ms. Phillips, I want you to, give me your thoughts on why you think it's taking so long to kind of revise our code.
I think it's because the VI code, it's a very large and it's a very old document. There's a lot of really strange things that you'll find if you take the time to look through it. I previously worked in the legislature, and I do remember moments of the code reviser kind of coming and stopping by the office to just let senators know of the changes that they think that should be made. And I'll never forget, this was maybe in 2019 or 2020 or so, the code reviser, somebody from the code reviser's office came in and said that they found something in the code that would have allowed for restaurants in St. Croix to still have latrines and not indoor plumbing. And that was 2019, 2020 when they found that. So it's a really, really large document, really, really old document. And as is with the functions that are and the resources available to the code revisor's office, yes, they kind of have to chip at it. There's a lot of things in there that you really wouldn't realize is in there until it's placed right in front of you.
Yeah. Mr. Martinborough, lawmakers, have expressed concerns about rushing the process. How do you think the legislature can balance the need for urgency with the need for a more thorough review?
I actually want to just mention something. I agree with what the senator mentioned about, having different subcommittees and tackling different titles. In order to actually see the different laws that need to be amended. I really think that's a good approach moving forward that I think they should take. But I would rather the legislature take their time in terms of looking at the laws instead of us having a bunch of bills that has to keep coming forward, because of minor changes that need to be made. I would rather them take the time to actually sit, look at the different titles, have the discussions, and then make the proposals. But having this bill that was passed is a great step moving forward to clean up some of the language in the Virgin Islands Code. So I think it's a great step moving forward.
And Attorney Walker, code reviser Iva Shridaran, he identified over 1,000 updated sections in the Virgin Islands Code that needs to be modernized. And given that vast scope, how do you think the legislature should prioritize which amendments get passed first?
I mean, they should prioritize it by the amendments that will directly affect the quality of life for people living in the Virgin Islands. So, for example, if you're looking at the Title 16 as it pertains to divorces and families and custody, I would start with those types of sections of the code because those changes would have a direct impact on the quality of life. And then you can move to the more technical, maybe less often used sections of the code. So I think it's an easy thing to prioritize. And unfortunately, it's going to have to be done in chunks of at a time and hopefully be completed, sometime within the next probably 15 to 20 years.
Yeah, and then I want to ask you, the omnibus bill, it mainly focused on like uncomplicated updates like correcting court names, but it does include one meaningful provision regarding police use of force during arrests involving moving vehicles. How significant do you think this change is, and what impacts could it have on law enforcement practices here in the territory?
I mean, I think it was a good substantive amendment. It seems somewhat out of place in that bill, but it does make sense. I was involved in at least one case that involved, a high speed chase and then the shootout of a vehicle, and a vehicle contained minors, right? So this legislation would provide some guidance to VIPD and their officers as to how to function in that type of situation. So the substantive change I think was needed. It was important. It seemed out of place, but oftentimes that's how laws are made.
I want to turn now to another recent development. The legislation to establish an annual beer, wine, and spirits festival in St. Croix has now cleared the legislature and is being forwarded to the governor. Mr. Martin Borough, do you think we need another government-sponsored festival when similar legislation for a music festival was just passed earlier this year?
To be honest, no. I think what needs to be done is we need to look at our current festivals that we have and just enhance the product. I think that's one of the problems we're facing. We are trying to create festivals for specific purposes when a festival, in my opinion, should be celebrating everything. And so I think we need to really look at ourselves and look at the products that we have and make a decision as to what we want to have in each festival and what makes each one unique, rather than having a bunch of festivals that's costing the government money, especially when getting sponsorships now is even harder to gain. So I think looking at our products that we have for the festivals and then capitalizing off of that instead of just having a bunch of festivals happening, I really think that is going to allow us to really market ourselves as a territory with what we want to provide, but at the same time, it'll save us money moving forward.
Yeah, and that, I was going to ask you, Raven, do you think that a beer, wine, and spirits festival is going to be sustainable without straining the government's budget?
I definitely don't think that it would be sustainable, in all honesty. I don't think that the best way forward is to try and introduce a new festival. I agree with the teacher over in St. Croix that it's much better for us to just enhance the product that we already have, maybe engage in some public-private partnerships to kind of empower smaller entrepreneurs to market what they do or market what services they offer during the festivals that we're already doing, rather than trying to start a whole new festival.
Attorney Walker, with a global decline in festival attendance, how do you think, the Virgin Islands can ensure this festival will ultimately be successful? And should the focus shift to improving existing events instead of adding new ones?
Let's improve our existing events. I didn't like the idea. I didn't like the concept of this one bit. I thought it lacked creativity. I want to promote things that, that other people are doing, like the Tart Wars. Like that is an ingenious idea for a festival. You bring people together, it promotes the local culture, and you can include families. Like, what are people going to do with their children at this beer, wine, and spirits or whatever festival? It really didn't make sense to me. I don't like the idea that it would be a requirement for the government to put it on. And there's nothing positive that I can think of to say about it. I would have much preferred that we sponsor some sort of music festival and you can incorporate spirits
Yeah.
or something of that effect. But to just have a focus on spirits, I just don't understand what would be the attraction. I don't understand how that would incorporate any aspect of our local culture or local people. And quite frankly, it just doesn't make any sense to me.
Yeah, and I'm hearing you say that, but Senator Capehart was saying that this festival is going to help build deeper relationships with local distilleries. But how realistic do you think that goal is, given how much involvement, and how much involvement should the private sector have with this festival?
I mean, the private sector should always be involved in anything of this nature, right? I get that, but a focus on spirits, like how many distilleries do we realistically have
Mhm.
that could even, support this type of an endeavor. You can have a music festival and have spirits there and still incorporate those local businesses. You can incorporate those few distilleries that are around. The concept doesn't make sense to me. I have not come across anything nationally or internationally where people are dying for a festival that's focused on beer or wine. And even if there was some sort of market for that, why would it be here?
Yeah.
It's just not part of our fabric. It's not something we do. It's not something we're known for. Yes, we're known for rum, but beer and wine and everything else, it just honestly, it doesn't make sense. And we already have a private organization that's promoting that. We have the St. Croix Food and Wine Festival every single year. I don't know why we need a government sponsored festival on top of that.
Yeah. And, Ms. Phillips, do you think, the overwhelming support, as per Senator Capehart, that businesses support this, ultimately is going to lead to success of this festival? I know you have your reservations that you've expressed already.
I just question the sustainability of it all. I can appreciate that the businesses are looking at the economic outpoint of this, and I am 100% in support of economic development, particularly in St. Croix. I just don't know if this is the right one.
Yeah. I want to circle back to the Waste Management Authority. It was revealed in a recent Senate hearing that they had already stopped handling trash collection for the Department of Education and are planning to do the same for public housing communities to cut costs and work towards breaking even. Attorney Walker, do you see this impacting the broader community?
I mean, possibly, to the extent that you have agencies or departments that now have to make other arrangements for their waste collection. But honestly, when you read the purpose of the statutory purpose for the Waste Management Authority, the reason why it was created, it necessarily wasn't created to haul trash for agencies of the government. I mean, it has a very specific purpose to manage solid waste, to deal with the landfills and things like that. So I think they're within your authority to use this as a cost-saving measure. If there's a concern about various agencies and departments handling their own trash and waste management, then we need to make that a specific purpose of the Waste Management Authority and make sure we properly fund that line item.
Yeah.
But the Waste Management Authority is a struggling semi-autonomous agency with a very important purpose, and it's underfunded and it's ill-equipped, and I don't blame them for trying to find avenues to save money and generate revenue.
Yeah. And Mr. Martinborough, do you think that them taking this step is necessary for them to help lower costs, or do you think they should be considering alternate solutions?
I absolutely agree with everything Attorney Walker just said. I mean, the Virgin Islands Waste Management Authority is a semi-autonomous agency, and one of the roles of a semi-autonomous agency is to come up with income-generating measures so that they can sustain themselves. So if they're seeing that they're having some issues financially, and this is one of the issues that they can try to address, I believe it's an awesome step. I would even say further, if because Senator Fred Gregory was one of the individuals who was pushing back on it. I believe that if this is a real concern and this is something that they want to address in the future, they're the legislature, they have the budget. If they want to add some funding so that the Waste Management Authority can cover doing that, then that's up to them. But the Waste Management Authority is struggling and they have to do what's best in able to sustain themselves as an agency.
Yeah. Ms. Phillips, with this cutting of the trash collection, do you think that it's going to possibly generate like a public health issue?
I think it definitely will if no alternate plan is established. I found it a little concerning, that exchange where the CEO said he spoke with Ms. Pell of Housing, and Housing is saying, oh no, the Senate says is probably going to block you. That's a little concerning to me. I feel like if this is the path or the option that Waste Management has taken, I feel like all those parties should have already been to the table to talk about that, not have Housing thinking that, oh no, the Senate's gonna block this, so I don't have to come up with an alternate plan. That's not very proactive. That's not being very proactive for the people of the Virgin Islands, and I think that's an ongoing issue that we see in our government.
Yeah. Mr. Martinborough, what should the Waste Management Authority's priority, balancing the budget or maintaining its service responsibilities? What do you think there should be their priority?
The Virgin Islands Virgin Islands Waste Management Authority, they have a main responsibility, and it's to manage the solid waste. And so, I believe that's their main responsibility that they should be fulfilling. And people need to continue understanding that, yes, they are a semi-autonomous agency, but they are part of the government. And so, I believe conversation should be happening so that they could be able to still provide their service, but navigate the financial issues that they're having. I think that's the step that we need to be taking moving forward. I just hope that the Virgin Islands Waste Management Authority continues doing its service and being the best at it, but looking at their finances and trying whatever they can possibly do to make sure that they're saving funds so they can be able to carry out their mandate as in the law.
And Attorney Walker, do you think that there's a broader issue here about how government entities are managing public funds, especially when services like trash collections are being transferred to other departments?
The broader issue is that there's a very limited pool of resources, a very limited pool of funds. So what you have happening right now are agencies somewhat competing for that limited pool, or finding ways to sustain themselves that may negatively impact other aspects of government. And I think that's what the issue is. So waste management is doing what it needs to do to survive, and that of course might have a negative impact on a housing authority, which of course might have a negative impact on these housing communities, which of course will have a negative impact for the territory. So unless there's some holistic approach to how this funding will be handled, and how our waste management will be managed, then I think this is just something that you'll continue to see.
Yeah. And, we hear talks about the legislature stepping in. Do you think that the Senate needs to step in to block the cuts to trash collection in housing communities? Or, do you think that waste management needs the flexibility to ultimately meet its financial goals?
I mean, I think the use of the word block was a poor choice of words. I'm not sure who initially used it, whether it was Ms. Pell or Mr. Griffith when he was speaking to the legislature. But what the legislature does have is the authority to enact laws, the authority to appropriate funds, and bring some relief to the issue. And I think probably what would have been more prudent, assuming that this did not occur, was for waste management to have these conversations with the senators beforehand and seek to identify a different solution, as opposed to coming to the legislature and then having to defend what might be an unpopular decision that it made. But such is the nature of government, and hindsight, of course, is 2020. So it's a troubling issue, but I do think there's a resolution for it, and I think the legislature can assist with it without necessarily blocking any efforts of Waste Management Authority.
And there's one more issue I'd like to discuss before we wrap up. During an emergency Board of Elections meeting recently, board member Harriet Mercer was ordered to apologize for actions that were deemed disruptive on the first day of early voting. The incident, which involved a poll watcher at the St. Thomas election office, caused such a disturbance that the police had to intervene. A motion was passed on October 15th, requiring Mercer to submit a written apology within 24 hours to Deputy Supervisor Kiva Mae Douglas and election officials who witnessed her, quote, negative behavior. Here's what Mercer had to say about the decision.
While I was there, I apologize to the people for any, noise or whatever have you. There was no delay, however. I didn't block anybody from voting. Okay, so I just want to make sure that that's understood, that that's false information. The lady came, she was eligible to be a watcher, and she didn't have the certificate. I had to stand up for her. So that's all what happened. But as far as what happened in their decision, I want to just thank the three board members, Ms. Springett, Mr. Joseph, Joseph, and myself, who voted in the negative of that. We voted that, I shouldn't be penalized for standing up because I was just dealing with the law. I was just doing my job, my duty to the people, and making sure a poll watcher was inside. Yeah. And any other noise, there was one person in the hallway who was making a lot of noise, and, that may have exerted me to go up a little notch, but no, there wasn't anything that was outlandish. So to apologize would just be for the noise or the behavior or whatever. Their vote was not based on facts. Their motion was not based on facts. But I will give the apology because I said I would anyway to the people that was there. I never wanted to make this public. You are here now making it public because of what happened, because they called an agency board meeting. None of that was necessary. None of it. So now the people are paying for stipends for no reason.
Ms. Mercer later issued a written apology as ordered before the deadline. Mr. Martinborough, as someone who has run for a seat on the Board of Elections, how do you think incidents like this can affect public trust in the election process?
The public has a hard time trusting the election system, period, from the beginning. As I was on the campaign trail a few months ago, they feel that the election system doesn't have any integrity, it doesn't have any trust. And just to go even further, this situation, and then weeks prior, we had this situation in regards to candidate Ida Smith. So it just proves that the election system definitely needs to look at some ethics, and they need to look at how they're planning to present themselves to the public and try to gain the public's trust back. Especially as a board member, and not only referring to the situation that occurred, but just on social media as well. This individual has been accused of different situations in regards to her behavior, in regards to candidates and the election system as a whole. So this doesn't help the election system trying to clean up the different issues that they're facing. But I do think they need to have a sit down, because I personally feel the supervisor and the Board of Elections are butting heads instead of actually coming together to try to clean up what's going on with the election system. I think if they can sit down together and actually discuss that, and even come up with possibly some code of ethics, I think it will help in making sure that the election system gains the trust and the transparency of the people.
Mm-hmm. Attorney Walker, Mr. Martinborough talked about them butting heads and, ultimately this situation occurring. Do you think it's affecting public trust in the election process?
I don't know that this particular episode has increased or eroded public trust. I just, I'm not sure exactly what happened. And no one has said exactly what has happened. All that I can determine is that this particular board member engaged in some sort of behavior for which she herself has acknowledged was somehow inappropriate or out of line, to the extent that she did issue the apology. I don't, when I read about things like this and I see things like this, it just seems like a distraction. It just seems like maybe some level of immature behavior, and it looks like she was subject to some sort of public reprimand. It's not something that I hold against the entire system. There are other concerns that, people would likely have with the system. This right here just seems like an episode of poor conduct to me.
Mm-hmm. Ms. Phillips, I want to get your take on this. Police stepping in. You have now a written apology. Ultimately, if she did not write the apology, it was to be that she would have been censured. Speak to me. What are your thoughts on, these series of events?
I am confused, kind of echoing what Attorney Walker said. It's kind of not clear to the public what happened. There's a weird lack of transparency around this. I can kind of see if the board wanted to handle this internally, but you went as far as going into executive session and coming out saying that she had to issue an apology. If this was serious enough that the police had to be called and you want her to issue a public apology, I think that you owe it to the public to be transparent about the situation. Like, announce that you're going to do. I can understand if they chose to not make comment because it was an ongoing investigation. But no, they handled the whole investigation and made a decision in executive session and just left the public to just wonder what happened.
And I see your concern with that. When we spoke with Ms. Mercer, during, and she gave her accounting of it, the issue stemmed from whether or not the poll watcher should have been allowed in the conference room for the entire day during the early voting process. Now, Supervisor Fox has stated that it's a small conference room. There are 31 candidates that are running. Everyone is entitled to have a poll watcher. Now, if everyone was to have a poll watcher, the conference room would be full. There would not be enough privacy. So Supervisor Fox has talked about a rotational schedule being implemented. And ultimately, the issue from Ms. Mercer's account was that, the individual was not allowed into the conference room, and, there was that debate, and then, voices were elevated, and voters were present ultimately. And because voters were present and because voices were raised, that's what caused the entire situation to kind of escalate, but ultimately, do you think that with the board choosing to have this apology, have her write this apology or face possible censure, does that affect the decisions, how the board makes decisions for other board members, potential future implications? What do you think?
Yeah, honestly, it does make me a little bit concerned if this is how it's handled, if you're going to handle a situation like this with a lack of transparency. Like I said, if it's that bad that you need to call the police, then yes, I think that the public also deserves a statement from election system on what occurred and what will be done to ensure that things like this don't happen in the future. I don't think it's enough to just have her issue an apology and you haven't spoken to the public about what she's apologizing for.
Yeah. Well, for those who may not have heard it, you can go back to the WTJX newsfeed and listen to it for yourself. But Attorney Walker, from a legal perspective, what kind of impact could this have on the board moving forward, and does it set any precedent?
Well, the board member issued the apology, so she didn't challenge it. She didn't, seek a declaration in court. So I don't think that there's any legal impact coming out of this specific situation. I think what the board, it sounds to me, based on what you just described, that the board just wanted to make clear that we don't sanction this type of conduct. That this type of conduct is not representative of the Board of Elections to the extent that we have now demanded an apology from this particular board member for those actions. And that's what it signals to me. I mean, I don't disagree with Ms. Phillips, a public statement explaining what occurred, may be in order, but honestly, I mean, at least for me, I'm just not that interested. There's just much larger issues at play here than, the poor behavior of this board member. Now, if it affected people's ability to vote that day, or if it turned individuals off from voting, I think that's something that the board should address publicly. That this, our polling centers are safe. It's safe to come out and vote. This was an isolated incident. We've taken steps so that it won't happen again. I'm just more concerned of voters being discouraged from exercising their right to vote than anything else.
I want to thank you all so much for being here today and for all of your wonderful input. And that's all the show that we have for you today. So be sure to tune in next Sunday at 1 p.m. for an all-new episode of Comes with the Territory. In the meantime, for your news updates, tune into the WTJX newsfeed on weekdays at 5 p.m. on 93.1 FM or by downloading the WTJX app. I'm Marcelina Ventura Douglas. From all of us here at WTJX Channel 12, take care.